Okay, our first question is, you voted with the mayor in support of city-backed TIF subsidies for an underperforming office building in downtown. Can you explain your decision on this matter and more generally, your position on public subsidies for private development in the city?
I'll take question number one. If that deal had been put together originally, I would not have voted for it. We're talking about the St. Louis Center TIF with John Steffen. And what happened is it's a very complicated financing project involving the state, involving private money, and involving city TIF and tax abatement. Part of the component was that the building that was there had a tenant, it's a small company here in St. Louis called Anheuser-Busch. And they were the major tenant of that building. The owner of that building was engaged in a variety of disputes, both with the developers and other property owners. And to make a long story short, Anheuser-Busch decided they were leaving. They were going to leave that building. That changed the financial aspect of this. And so the bondholder said, no, we cannot go forward with this unless the city pledges its full faith and credit on just not the entire project, but just that particular building. I did not feel comfortable doing it, but given the investment that had been made both in public funds from the state and private funds, I felt in this situation it was worth the risk. And I think there is a risk, but I think the risk is very limited. Now, the second question, part of the second question was?
Can you explain your decision and what you did?
I did.
And more generally, your position on public subsidies for private development in the city?
Okay. In a city like St. Louis, which is an old Rust Belt city, okay, a city that has a lot of old cleaners, a lot of old filling stations, a lot of brownfields, it's very, very difficult to do economic development without some public subsidy. Just acquiring title to some land can be very, very complicated. I think what you'll see is as economic development takes place, and you know right now for the first time in over 40 years, we're building market rate housing in North St. Louis. I mean, think about that. Market rate housing in North St. Louis without a subsidy. As the economics of the city continue to improve, you'll see some of those subsidies decrease, okay? I am not, and again, that is a tool that is used in various circumstances. I think you'll see it decrease as the years go on, but I still would be committed to it, particularly in areas where it's very hard to attract development.
Okay, next question. Please provide an example of a decision or action you have taken as president of the Board of Aldermen that has had a direct impact on improving St. Louis. How have you made a difference in your position?
Well, what I've done by balancing the committees both racially and geographically is I've cut down substantially on a lot of friction among the aldermen. We are operating as an efficient legislative body, and I think that's important. We no longer obstruct the process, we move it forward. In my own legislative package, I take great pride in two pieces of legislation. The domestic violence legislation. This was a serious, serious problem, okay? You know, I mean, if a woman is physically beaten up, she can go to the hospital, and Medicaid will take care of that. But if she has to leave her home and leave her high blood pressure at home, where's she going to get high blood pressure for the rest of the month? High blood pressure medication. She may be able to afford it for one payment a month. This sets up a fund to help these women get back on their feet. Then the other bill I did, allowing the police officers to arrest individuals who are in violation of protection orders, such as prostitutes, drug dealers, and their customers, is helping dealing with some serious nuisance problems in certain neighborhoods where that kind of activity congregates.
If the State Board of Education votes to place supervision of the city public schools in a 3-person panel, what sort of person will you pick to serve on this committee?
Everybody's asking me to be on it, so I'm not going to have any shortage of applicants. I'm looking for somebody that has two main qualifications. I want somebody that has some connection to either children or education. I think that is essential, that it has somebody be connected to either children or education. And while I have great respect for many of the people who work in public schools, my wife taught at Sumner High School for years. My wife's been in public high schools, or the city schools, for over 30 years. She just retired in May. I'm going to pick someone who has no connection to the St. Louis City Public Schools, because I think it's important we have someone to take a fresh look, someone who doesn't have an agenda, pro or con, someone who has no relationship with the schools, but someone who has some commitment, has some background and knowledge of children and education. And I think my appointment, well, I know my appointment will be a good choice for the schools.
What is your position on the proposed new lease of Forest Park land to BJC?
I am generally opposed to it for a variety of reasons. Number one, the public is against this. I mean, let's just be point blank about it. I have not, and I've been to dozens of neighborhood meetings, street festivals, ward organizations. I find no public support for this, number one. And every now and then politicians ought to do what, the public wants. So I find no public support for it. Number two, this isn't a lease. I mean, technically, legally it's a lease. In reality, it's a sale. It's a 99-year lease. And once it's gone, we are never getting it back. Okay, this is not the sort of thing that 3 years after they build it, they decide they want to use it for something else, and they give it back to us. When it's gone, it's gone. I will applaud BJC for amending their proposal, okay? They still not have dealt with many of the concerns of the neighbors around there, but I will commend them for doing that. And finally, if it is going to be done, we have to find an adequate way of determining what the financing of that's going to be. I will not support it between now and the time of the vote in April, because I think that would simply be an attempt to undermine the voters. But I really doubt, unless there's some major change, that I would support that lease.
What is your position on charter reform, and what changes, if any, would you like to see?
In the past 10 years, there have probably been, I would say, maybe 8 or 9 charter changes passed by the voters. I've been the sponsor of the vast majority of those. Last November, there were 4 charter amendments proposed to the voters. 1 failed, 3 of them passed. The 3 that passed were the ones I authored and sponsored. I generally support charter change. I'm in favor of making any changes to the charter that will make it more efficient, make government more reasonable, and more accountable. I am, however, concerned about changes that would reduce accountability. For example, I think it's important that you keep an independent comptroller. I think it's important that the comptroller be able to hold the Board of Aldermen and the mayor accountable. I don't want to see power consolidated. So I'm open to any charter change that people wish to, that people want to consider, and there probably will be some down the road, as long as there's accountability and make certain that the city gets its fair share on things.
The tradition of aldermanic courtesy dictates that aldermen defer to an individual representative's judgment for projects and legislation in his or her ward. Do you support this practice, and why or why not?
Generally, most of the time, okay? There are very few situations where aldermanic courtesy is a big battle. Most of the times, aldermanic courtesy, and what aldermanic courtesy is, an alderman is the person who sponsors legislation in his or her ward. And so, for example, if a piece of property wants to be rezoned and the alderman doesn't want to rezone it, it doesn't get rezoned. If a piece of property, if you need a piece of property rezoned and the alderman agrees to rezone it, and the public and people in the ward are against it, other aldermen will vote in favor of it. I generally support it for this reason. Number one, it reduces problems at the Board of Aldermen. It reduces conflict at the Board of Aldermen. It means that most aldermen do not have to deal with neighborhood issues in other wards. Now, aldermanic courtesy, like anything else, can be abused, okay? I mean, there's always some time when somebody says, well, I'm the alderman of this ward, and I'm going to do it. I don't care what anyone says. And there have been situations on the Board of Aldermen where we have voted against aldermanic courtesy. I've done it several times, but not frequently. I think it's a legislative tool. I don't think you're going to see it disappear in the near future. And where it is very responsible is it holds the alderman accountable for what he or she is doing in their ward, so that they're not in a situation where they can claim, well, the other members of the board did it. No, we know if it happened in your ward, you were the one that wanted it.
St. Louis City, as well as 8 surrounding counties, have until 2010 to improve air quality in order to comply with U.S. EPA's findings of unhealthy levels of soot and smog forming pollutants. Given that St. Louis City has asthma rates significantly higher than the national average, what approach do you recommend to make St. Louis City a healthier place to live?
Well, what I did 3.5 years ago is I passed a bill banning the burning of medical waste here in St. Louis. So we can't burn medical waste anymore in St. Louis. Even though I was on the losing side, I was one of the aldermen who voted against the resolution supporting the building of the cement plant down in St. Genevieve, because I very much fear that when that plant is up in full production, it's going to have an adverse effect on our air quality. I sit on the board of directors of East-West Gateway, and we are now in the process of trying to come up with a cohesive metropolitan plan to deal with this. But it's going to be difficult because you have many, many jurisdictions, you have many, many different interest groups who are battling over this. And so what I can pledge to you is I'm going to try to continue what I've done in the past. I mean, I've supported better air quality for the city of St. Louis, and I will continue to do that.
Is there anything that you can do to alleviate gentrification's negative effects? There are areas of the city in certain neighborhoods where people are at risk at being displaced by rent increases, et cetera.
There's very little we can do about rent increase. What we can do is simply be fair, though, to people who may be losing their property through redevelopment, making certain that they are adequately compensated. I've sat on the airport commission for probably 6 or 7 years now, and we've made certain that in the buyouts, people are adequately compensated. Anytime you have a city that's going to be going through redevelopment, there's going to be a certain amount of displacement. Now, that's just the cost of doing business, but you have to make certain that it does not adversely impact poor people or working people or elderly people are on fixed incomes. And I have to say, for the most part, I think, not in every situation, but for the most part, the city has done a good job in doing that.
And we have one last question.
Okay.
As president, what can you do to ensure that our cultural heritage is not sold out to corporations and ensure that there's public input in long-scale development? Might be large scale.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I do my best to critically look at every redevelopment bill that comes before the Board of Aldermen. And certainly if I see anything that I think is unfair or unsavory, I won't vote for it. But much of that is under the control of the individual alderman and St. Louis Development Corporation. Certainly we want a city that's diverse, okay? We don't want to be, a metropolitan area that's just all, the same. I mean, that's what gives us our flavor. That's what gives us our strength. And so I have, over the last 24 years on the Board of Aldermen, supported those efforts, and I will continue to do so.
And if you want to make any closing comments?
Just again, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the opportunity to address you. I'm going to try and stay for a while, but I have 3 or 4 more meetings to cram in tonight. But I do appreciate it, and more importantly, I appreciate your interest in government, in politics, and in your community. So thank you.